I'm the former acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. I'm very excited and proud about what we did over the last 4 years, from securing the border, providing some integrity back into the immigration system, securing aviation, maritime, critical infrastructure, cybersecurity. There's a lot that goes on into Homeland Security that a lot of the American people don't see every day. America First means to me is an approach. It's putting the safety, the interest, and the well-being of Americans first as you look at public policy. What's the best interest for the average American? That's really the starting point. The Center for Homeland Security and Immigration at the America First Policy Institute really be focused on a couple of core initiatives. Obviously, strengthening border security and immigration policy. We want to stop the human trafficking network. We want to stop the cartels, making sure that we combat terrorism. It's also protecting our critical infrastructure, whether that's our physical infrastructure or that's our cyber infrastructure. And then on the China front, making sure that we counter foreign influence. We need an America First, we need a security first perspective as we deal with the variety of challenges that we see in the Homeland Security arena. And we're going to be building on the policies of the last 4 years, putting America first based on the rule of law. And I think if you do that, the way that we're doing that, the way that the Center and the Policy Institute is looking at it, we're going to be pretty successful in the long run.
Good evening, and welcome to today's discussion on the historic border and immigration crisis that Americans are currently facing. I'm Chad Wolf, the former acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and chairman of the Center for Immigration and Homeland Security at the America First Policy Institute. The America First Policy Institute is dedicated to promoting policies that put Americans first in public policy discourse. From human smuggling and human trafficking to illegal narcotics and other dangerous contraband, what Americans are experiencing on the border is unprecedented in so many different ways. If we look back, we can trace the causes of this surge to deliberate action taken by the Biden administration earlier this year. Instead of taking office and carefully evaluating programs and policies that were successful in securing the border, the Biden administration instead made political decisions to cancel proven and effective policies such as a border wall system, the Remain in Mexico program, and our asylum cooperative agreements, and many more. And of course, they did this without consulting local communities or law enforcement. And so why is that important? Because the consequences of illegal immigration are not just felt at the national level. I would argue they're felt more closely at the local and state level. And so that's why I'm honored to have with us two leading sheriffs from around the country. We have Sheriff Jenkins from Frederick County, Maryland, has over 30 years of law enforcement experience. You've testified several times before Congress on multiple occasions and has talked publicly about the need for strong enforcement of our immigration laws. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Sheriff Page from Rockingham County, North Carolina. Again, more than 30 years of law enforcement experience, has seen the impact of illegal narcotics in his home county, and again has been a vocal critic of sanctuary city policies as well. We've worked closely when I was at the department, so again, thank you both for being here, for your commitment to upholding the rule of law, and for having this discussion today.
Thank you.
All right, so let me just jump right into it with the first question. I'll give it to you, Sheriff Page. So there's a lot of reasons, I think, why we're experiencing this historic border and immigration crisis that we have today. I mentioned a few of those, but really in your opinion, because as we talked about, what impacts local communities around the country is this illegal migration, is the the public safety consequences that we have here. So in your view, how did we get to where we are today? And do you think that the Biden administration, they have a good strategy and a good plan going forward to address the crisis?
Well, originally I thought it was poor policy. But as the months have gone by, and we're nearly into our first year with President Biden, it seems that it's not poor policy. It was a plan to do this, and it's a plan to fail. And we've watched. They did away with the Remain in Mexico policy, like you talked about, the Title 42 checks and stuff like this. Again, what comes through the border is not staying there. Yeah. And people are being redistributed all over the country, and we don't know who those persons are. How are they vetted? Just like with situation in Afghanistan and in the border areas, how are these persons being vetted? And you being with Homeland Security, right. That's a concern, because when people come to my community and stuff and they're working, we like to know who's coming to our community.
Sure.
And then when persons end up getting arrested and in our jails, with the current policy, which you saw in September and then in October, that just came out from Homeland Security Secretary, they put restrictions on who's going to be, detainers going to be issued on and removed.
Yeah.
So if you're not removing the criminal offender from the community and they're being released back out into the community, they have an opportunity to reoffend, and we're seeing that. And I think that is bothering me because there are persons that are committing criminal offenses, that are serious offenses, even DWI offenses are serious offenses, and they're being released back out into the community to reoffend, and it's affecting their citizens and people of their own community, a part of the immigrant community.
Right. So, I think that's a great point.
It's a long answer, but you know.
But you bring up a great point, which is they've got to take their responsibilities seriously at the border, right? Because if they don't, then you're going to continue to get this illegal activity coming into the country, but also going into your communities. And at the end of the day, it's not DHS in DC that's having to deal with this.
Correct.
It's sheriffs like yourself, other law enforcement that are now having to address the illegal activity that's emanating from the border and because of the policies that are being enacted.
Absolutely right. And understand there's two components to immigration enforcement. Certainly at the border where the policy, again, probably by design has failed. The other part is interior enforcement, which is what we do in our cooperation with ICE. So like Sam said, time and time again, we arrest violent criminals, name the crime, it runs a gamut. We have arrested these people, and without the appropriate partnerships and enforcement on the interior, these people are released onto the streets. That's the message that I've been giving to my people now for 12 years, 14 years.
And so contrast that a little bit with what you saw perhaps during the Trump administration versus what you're seeing today, because we've seen the DHS secretary issue guidance after guidance to ICE to not do their job, to not enforce the law, to not arrest and deport individuals that don't have a legal right.
President Biden has effectively, through his policy and his mission so far, has basically made ICE ineffective. Okay, where we're going to go with this is the fact that under the Trump administration, I can tell you, we've cooperated with ICE under 4 presidents: President Bush, Obama, President Trump, and now Biden. Right. Certainly under President Trump, the program ran at its best, was most effective, and ICE did a phenomenal job. They knew what their mission was, their policies were clear, their directives were clear, and we deported criminals.
Yeah, I think that's important, and that's really the name of the game at the end of the day. Let me shift a little bit. We talked a little bit about leadership at DHS. Talk to me about your interactions that you have. You may not get the opportunity to interact directly with the DHS secretary, but certainly there's other elements of the department that you are certainly, hopefully, in close contact with and communicating to. Can you talk to me a little bit about how that's been going over the course of 10 or 11 months, and then we'll kind of go from there?
My communications with the field office directors out of Baltimore, which is the office we work with, are very good at that level, between myself and that level of ICE. However, when you get above that, I haven't heard anything from anybody. And again, during the President Trump's years in office, the communications were great. Actually, you and I have talked a number of times when I came to Washington. But let me tell you right now, ICE wants to do their job. They want nothing more than be given their mission, be given their directives, and go after criminals. But it's not being done right now. And that message, again, that's what I get from Baltimore all the time. But the communications is great.
Okay. At the local level, it's
at
good.
The local level. And listen, ICE gets demonized all the time, and it's so wrong.
Yeah.
It's absolutely so wrong.
Absolutely. Sure.
I'm going into my 24th year as sheriff in Rockingham County, 40 years this year, and in North Carolina as a law enforcement officer. And I've always encouraged personnel that worked under me and work with me to work with our local, state, and federal partners. At the local level and the field level, we do have some good cooperation with our federal partners. But beyond that, just like Sheriff said, I got to say this, beyond that, we don't hear a thing except a memo from Homeland Security.
But when we talk about law enforcement, at least what I found working at the department, it's leadership. Leadership matters in this case,
does.
Right?
It really does.
And when I have 2 sheriffs here that say they, outside of their local field office, they're not hearing anything from the department. There's no leadership being provided.
Zero communications, nothing whatsoever.
Yeah. So that's obviously a significant problem, significant deficiency I think we're seeing across the board, but you're experiencing
in past years, again, under President Trump, the director of ICE, Director Homeland at the time, and then the director that followed him, and I forget the name, they came out to my county and looked through my detention center and visited our program.
Right.
We don't get that anymore. And we're an hour from Washington.
Right.
We're an hour
Right.
from where policy is set. We're an example of what could be done across the country.
We just started working with the Warrant Service Officer Program, and we were here at the February conference in 2020, National Sheriff's Conference, and then we came back home in March. Right before we had the lockdown, we started the Warrant Service Officer Program. We're trained. Some personnel in our jail were trained to serve the administrative warrants, handling the detainers. It was a good program. But I haven't heard a lot this past year about the Warrant Service Officer Program and how long it will stand. That's what concerns me. Not only am I concerned about a loss of these 287G programs, the full-blown programs that are working in the bigger facilities, but also the Warrant Service Officer Program. It was 10 counties in the state of North Carolina and several in Florida, but we haven't heard anything, and we haven't even talked about detainers yet. But I have information I want to tell you about that.
Well, you read my mind, because my next question for you was, AFPI, we put out a piece last week that talked about information sharing between federal law enforcement and state and local law enforcement, and how critical that is. But I think what we've seen is there's been a different approach, again, the last administration to what we've seen over the last 10 to 11 months.
Which is
whether,
lack of.
Whether we saw, you just talked about the Warrant Service Officer Program or the 287G program. Talk to me a little bit about what you experienced again previous 4 years and what you've experienced the last 10 or 11 years, and why that's important. I assume there's a big change, but why that's important.
Okay, again, under the 287G program, during the previous 12 years of our program, we have served almost 1,600 detainers on criminals, and those criminals were removed from my county. Okay.
So these are some of these could be violent criminals.
Listen, every murder, attempted murder, aggravated assault, rape, sexual assault, and listen, sexual assault is very prevalent in the populations that are coming across our borders. Yeah. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, you name it, it's run the gamut, like I've said. But the fact is, during the previous 11 months, we've only served 20 detainers out of 1,600. Do the math. The previous administrations, especially under President Trump, was the most effective period of time for 287G.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
That is amazing.
And since January of last year till the present end of November, we've had 4. And I'm a small county now in North Carolina, but look how this could affect other counties. I've had 45 persons that were criminally charged, illegally in the country, criminally charged, end up in our jail facility, and I've only had one detainer issued, and that person was for second-degree murder. The key of the biggest offenses are DWI, 51% of those persons, those 45, DWI, assault, and drug charges. But only one detainer issued since January to November.
So again, to put a finer point on why this is important is you have criminals, violent criminals coming into your communities, committing crimes. They have immigration issues with them as well. Right. What I should be doing is coming into your jails, picking these individuals up and deporting them at the end of the day.
We actually have the ability
right.
to prevent crime working with our local, state, and federal partners through you work with the detainers. Removing persons from our communities that are criminal offenders, removing from community and moving them out of our community does make your community safer. But allowing persons to go with no detainers to release back into the community to reoffend does nothing but continue.
Sam, add on top of that the no bail or low bail policies of a lot of states. We just had a case last week, arrested individual out of Mexico, previous deportation, came into our county, home invasion, first degree assault, taken before the commissioner on the local charges, released on their recognizance. So without the 287 program, he's back out the door. But because of our program, he's off the street until ICE decides what they're going to do.
Right. And I think this is important because I think there are some folks out there that want to say that border security and this immigration crisis is about minors or families that are fleeing persecution. But what you're talking about, this is criminal activity. These are public safety threats, maybe even national security threats that are in your communities.
During this whole DACA conversation of a couple years ago, so under the DACA provision, we've had individuals come into our county who came in under the DACA protection over the years, who have now grown up, are young adults who have committed crimes, validated MS-13 gang members, who now, because they've committed those crimes, we can take an action and get them out of our county. So those things are never thought about. We've deported more than 115 gang members out of our county that were primarily MS-13.
Right.
That makes an impact on local public safety.
Absolutely.
And what I've spent the past 11 years is trying to communicate with sheriffs across the state of North Carolina, working with the North Carolina Sheriff's Association, working with the national sheriffs, is trying to educate about what's going on with the border and how it does directly impact you in the interior. Again, you said it, Border Patrol under the past administration were very well supported by President Trump. Also the interior enforcement, the ICE agents. But what we're seeing now is we do not see that support. Yeah. And I can only imagine if I was a federal agent on the border and what I saw a few months ago, without the support of the leadership in Washington, it's tough.
Secretary Wolf, we have had 7 consecutive years, working on our 8th consecutive year, of big decreases in Part 1 or serious crime. Yeah. That's not by accident. That's in part due to our cooperation with ICE when you look at the numbers.
Absolutely critical. And I think it's important to remind folks that the crisis that we're experiencing today doesn't just happen. It doesn't magically appear. I think it's a coordinated effort. What we're experiencing today was by design, by the Biden administration. Talk about all the policies that you've been talking about that they're no longer talking to you about. They're no longer cooperating with you about. And I think that's important to keep reminding people, because again, it affects real people in real communities across this country. It doesn't just affect Laredo and El Paso and the folks along that border. These are, you represent counties in the interior of the country.
My concern is this: Americans, our criminal justice system is not prepared for the chaos and the problems that I see coming across that border.
And we didn't bring this up yet, and I'm probably a little early on it. Yep. But one of the reasons why I got involved in 11 years ago in the border issue was people were saying, "Sheriff, where's all these drugs coming from? They're affecting our community." Right. That was before fentanyl and heroin were big. Since 2017 to last year's numbers, we've seen an increase in the overdoses. Yep. We've seen an increase in overdose deaths. Yes. Fentanyl and heroin are the main thing that are killing people in my community, in small town North Carolina and across this country. So what happens at the border doesn't stay there. The drugs that are transported, the cartel, they're not, we should be focused and targeted on the cartel also, but they're making the money. They control the southern border. The sad thing is they control the southern border, but I don't hear the communications between the United States government and the Mexican government to deal with that. Now, I saw just even before we got into Mexico, in Panama, it was like 40-some persons were arrested, were tied in with Al-Qaeda, that were picked up in Panama because they do the biometric checks, and they caught these persons. But those persons, truth be known, were heading to America through our most weakest point, our southern border. What comes through there doesn't stay there. If we fail to secure our borders, Mr. Secretary, if we fail to secure our borders, every sheriff in America will become a border sheriff, and that's what's happening.
So let's talk about illegal narcotics just real quick, because I think that's an important point. So we had when I was in office, it was about 70,000 overdose deaths a year on average. That number is now 100,000 overdose deaths. So these are illegal narcotics that are killing Americans every single day. And the number I have is that the cartels are making $14 million a day by the smuggling and the trafficking that they are doing on just people. On just people. And guess what they're doing with that money? They're putting it back into their criminal enterprise so they can smuggle. They can traffic more individuals and more money. So your point is excellent, right? Because this is not just about people. This is about illegal narcotics and what's killing Americans every single day. And the synthetic opioid, I mean, they're so small and so deadly that it's very difficult.
We're seeing a resurgence of cocaine. We're seeing, of course, more heroin than ever, more fentanyl than ever. We're hearing now that crystal meth is coming across the border in huge quantities. Going back to the human piece of it, we just shut down a prostitution operation in rural Frederick County was operated by the criminal enterprise MS-13 with women trafficked from El Salvador through the border to New York, rotating the women from New York to Frederick County every week. That's what people don't understand. So they're indentured servants.
I'm going to come back to that in just a minute.
No, so
it's a great point.
So it's national security, it's public safety, it's a humanitarian issue, and it's public health. Yeah. Title 42, COVID checks. It's not being done.
Absolutely. So I'm glad you brought it up, human trafficking. I don't think this is an issue that gets enough attention. That when people think of the border, they just think, again, people want to come for economic reasons, which they do. I don't disagree with that. But the human trafficking, the child sexual exploitation, these are horrific crimes. And again, you see them in your communities every day. What can you tell us about maybe things that you're seeing. You just talked about a ring that was
Talked
that was
about a
broken into.
prostitution ring. We see prostitution rings set up very often in motel rooms. We see the child predators on the internet going after children who have been trafficked across the border into the metropolitan area. Is very prevalent.
And these aren't just one-offs.
No,
right?
no. These are routine operations. Yeah. Absolutely, and the public doesn't realize this. The public doesn't see that piece of it. Right. They only hear
The border.
the border.
Right.
But like Sam, I said in Congress 14 years ago, every county will become a border county. Every county now is a border county.
It's amazing.
It is.
And what worries me is if we don't cut the flow in those different areas we've talked about, where are we going to be in the next 5 years, 10 years from now? How's the future? How's the future for America and American citizens going to be? And people have come here the lawful way to live. How is it going to be?
Yeah, we've had beheadings, we've had mutilations, we've had gang killings in rural Frederick County, which is a farm county, farm community. We have those types of crimes going on. Again, young people mutilated, killed, gang retaliations. How do I tell my citizens this is okay?
So, Sheriff, when we talk about illegal immigration, I think it's important to point out that the vast majority of Americans like legal migration, like individuals who come the right way to the country, wait in line, go through the security checks that you talked about earlier, making sure they do that. You know, our economy needs this workforce at the end of the day. What we're really talking about is illegal migration and all the negative consequences of that. You want to
That's
make
correct.
a comment?
And I just want to be clear today is that I've worked with Sheriff Jenkins for many years, but I know we support legal immigration and legal immigration process, and we also support the rule of law.
Right.
If we don't have that, we have nothing.
And that's our job as constitutional officers, is to support that. And look at what it demoralizes. Again, demoralizes the legal immigrants that come to this country and do it the right way.
Well, sure.
So this disincentivizes illegal immigration.
But you're exactly right. It's about the rule of law, but this idea that if you want to come to the country and you want to, go through that visa process and you're waiting multiple years in some cases to get in line, but yet someone else can come illegally and get some of the same benefits that you can. I would say that that's patently un-American.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what most Americans react to and have a visceral reaction to. Again, legal migration is fine. Legal immigration is fine. What we're talking about is the illegal aspect of it, the Biden administration not understanding that and continuing policies that promote, or it's that pull factor that we talk
And
about.
the point you're making is always lost in the politics.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And what we talk about is not about politics. It's about public safety. If you put politics above what we do, it's a dangerous proposition. We're about public safety and protecting our citizens across this country. And I like to talk about the cartel because they don't get enough attention. But the first time they start doing the bad things, the evil things they do down in Mexico and Central America, first when they start doing that here in America, maybe it'll get some attention. Yeah. But I don't want it to get to that point. We need to do something now.
I couldn't agree more with you, Sheriff. I think we need to get serious about the transnational criminal organizations, the Mexican cartels. We need to play offense because otherwise this is just going to continue to grow. And I think people just kind of throw their hands up sometimes and say, well, it's been happening for 20, 30, 40 years and we just got to live with it.
I think President Trump had a great suggestion several years ago when he said these cartels, these criminal gangs should be treated as terrorist organizations. Which is exactly what they are.
Right. And we're certainly looking at that at AFPI as well. We're going to be writing and talking a little bit more about both the pluses and then maybe some weaknesses in that argument as well. So I think it's certainly a good way to put it. Let me shift real quick. Sure. We talked about law enforcement. I think President Trump was just a great proponent of the men and women in blue and doing everything we can. I think what we've seen from this administration, unfortunately, from this secretary, is an attack on law enforcement. Not having their back, not supporting them, not giving them the benefit of the doubt if there appears to be something going on. I'm referring to something that occurred on the border with horse patrols. But I understand you're not on the border, but how does the attack on law enforcement affect your ability to do your job day in and day out?
Listen, first of all, I can testify to this, that when President Trump came into office, you could feel the wind shift from the Obama administration, which was against law enforcement. Now we had a president and a DOJ that supported law enforcement. We knew it, my men and women knew it. Fast forward to now, we've got another administration who we now have demoralized law enforcement. We've defunded law enforcement. We've stripped away through this so-called police reform all the rights and all the things that law enforcement could rely on to protect the public, we're in a dangerous time. And we're really in a danger.
And look at the level of violence. You know, I was just watching a little TV this morning before it came over. Look at the level of violence has increased. The violent crime has increased across America. I mean, you're talking about these mass theft rings and stuff like this, but also the violence.
I'm convinced the left, the liberal left, despises law enforcement, doesn't want law and order, and wants total chaos. They have, the more the public relies on the government. That's exactly what they want.
Right.
And President Biden's administration, it seems to be an open border concept. That's where the thought process is. And if we don't change it, again, when I go back to the citizens I serve in North Carolina and say, I'm trying to do what I can to stop the flow coming from the border, but it's coming along the interstates and it's coming to you in just a few days. And thank goodness we have Narcan, because we've been able to save more lives because we have Narcan, but that's just a temporary fix.
Right.
Well, let me talk about what happened in Maryland yesterday. So last session, the General Assembly passed a law which prohibits me as sheriff from entering into agreements from housing federal detainees, ICE detainees. The governor vetoed that bill. The General Assembly met yesterday and overrode that veto, so I'm now essentially out of business. I still have the 287G program to keep the criminals off the street that we arrest locally, but now ICE can't bring detainees to me.
So what do you think is the mindset behind that decision?
It doesn't make sense to me, because to me that's even worse, because now, say an individual that's maybe from the Frederick area who could have been housed in my jail, they're sent hundreds or even thousands of miles away and detained somewhere. Plus, listen, there's a revenue stream that goes with that. Sure. My county was getting $1.5 million a year at a minimum for me housing ICE detainees. And that wasn't the sheriff's slush fund. I turned that money over to the county's general fund. And those even in county government who despise what I'm doing with working with ICE, they were relying on that money.
Yeah.
So that's gone.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So we talked a lot about the dangerous policies that we've seen over the last 10 or 11 months. If you had an audience either, with the Secretary of Homeland Security or another leadership of the department, and you could give them 2 or 3 things and ask them to do that. I know I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit. What would be those 1 or 2 things to say, if you don't do anything else, from my seat here as a sheriff, here's what I need you to do to make my communities more safe?
Go ahead.
Good.
Maybe 2 or 3 things here.
Probably the same.
Number one is the border barrier policy, the border wall policy was good policy. And I've listened to sheriffs and said there's some places it wasn't conducive, but some places it was a good place to have the border barriers. So that funding for the Border Patrol and support, they need the support. Any leader, if he doesn't support his troops, they can't do their job. Right. So supporting Border Patrol, supporting ICE, and letting them do their jobs, and quit implementing more policies that put more restriction and raise the bar where these guys cannot do their jobs. I can't imagine. I'm a constitutional officer, and I'm going to follow the law, and I'm going to follow the U.S. Constitution. That's my guide. And I support my people, but we also need to let the federal officials for Border Patrol and ICE, let them do their jobs. Right. Border wall, let them enforce the laws. Let's secure the border. If we don't work to secure the border and we don't cut the flow, we're going to continue having problems. The last thing is we do need to put some money into addiction treatment and care, because it's supply and demand. Sure. It's a basic business model, supply and demand. Got to reduce the demand and cut the supply. And you said it, and I support this 100%. I brought this up to the former Homeland Security Secretary under President Obama, and I told her, I said, we need to declare the Mexican drug cartel a terrorist organization, these transnational gangs, terrorist organizations, so we can put the full gambit of our resources against them and stop them.
Absolutely. Sheriff, before I go to you, I think what you brought up is critically important. When we talk about ICE guidelines, even during the Trump administration, so we allowed ICE to do their job regardless. And what that resulted in is about 80 to 89% of those that they would pick up and remove were criminals or had criminal convictions. And so we were prioritizing public safety threats by doing that, but we did it in a way that it still allowed them to do their job, so that if an ERO officer went into a stash house and picked up the criminal that they were targeting, well, they could also pick up the other individuals that were there illegally. Today, they can't do that. Today, they are given very specific instructions on who they can't really target and pick up.
Plus, they had the prosecutorial discretion not to arrest somebody or not to deport. It's gone now, right?
Yeah.
It's gone.
All right.
My
Well,
three.
let's get your top three.
Continue to build this wall with the technology that they need and the manpower with Border Patrol. Number two would be let ICE do their jobs of arresting criminals, removing them from the country. Number three, President Biden step up and convince law enforcement that you have our back, that you have the backs of the men and women on the ground in this country, state, local, and federal law enforcement. Let's rebuild America the right way and not the way we're going.
Great. Well, sheriffs, thank you for being here today. I appreciate the conversation. I'm sure we could keep going on and on about a lot of these issues because you guys live and breathe this every day. I did for a period of time, still very much involved here.
We miss you. I miss you.
Wow, I appreciate that. Well, at AFPI, we're going to continue to advocate for a lot of these common sense border security, immigration enforcement provisions that we think are on the right side, that most Americans, the majority of Americans, support at the end of the day. A lot of this is about communicating it and really understanding, because what we see, at least from the other side, is maybe not always being transparent on what they're doing.
And I think the pendulum will swing back and we will prevail in the end.
Well,
with leaders like yourself.
I know that there's only so much the federal government can do, but it takes leadership at the local level, sheriffs. So I want to thank you for what you do. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr.
All right,
Secretary.
thanks.